It started with a simple rule that Tyler Benson had heard his entire life growing up in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Illinois. Never answer the door after midnight unless you're expecting someone. But on that night, sitting alone in his parents' house while a storm raged outside, that rule slowly began to feel less like advice and more like a warning he should have taken seriously. Tyler was 19, home alone for the weekend while his parents attended a wedding out of state, and his younger brother was staying with friends, leaving him completely alone in the house. A situation he had been excited about at first, but as the night stretched on and the storm grew louder, that excitement faded into a strange, creeping unease he couldn't explain. By 11:45 p.m., the rain was hitting the windows so hard it sounded like something was trying to get in, and the wind howled through the trees, occasionally causing the lights to flicker just enough to make shadows shift unnaturally across the walls. Tyler sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, tried to ignore the growing tension in his chest, telling himself it was just the weather messing with his head. Then, at exactly 12:03 a.m., there was a knock at the front door. It was soft, too soft, almost polite. Tyler froze instantly, his eyes slowly moving toward the door at the end of the hallway, his heartbeat beginning to pound in his ears. He wasn't expecting anyone. No one even knew he was home alone. He stayed perfectly still, waiting, hoping it was just his imagination, but then the knock came again, 3 slow, deliberate taps that echoed through the house in a way that felt intentional. Tyler stood up slowly, his legs feeling heavier than usual, and walked toward the door, each step filled with hesitation. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice slightly shaky. There was no answer, just the sound of rain pounding against the door. He got closer, reaching the small window beside the door. But the darkness outside was so thick he couldn't see anything clearly. Then, just as he leaned in slightly, a shape moved. Someone was standing there, a tall figure, completely still just beyond the glass. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. "Hello," he tried again, louder this time. Still no answer. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to breathe. Something about it felt wrong. Not just because it was late, but because whoever it was had made no attempt to explain themselves. Tyler's instincts told him to walk away, to ignore it, to go back to the couch and pretend nothing was happening. But curiosity and fear mixed together in a dangerous way, keeping him frozen in place. Then, unexpectedly, the figure stepped closer to the door, just enough for Tyler to make out a face, or at least what should have been a face. But the porch light flickered at that exact moment, casting shadows that distorted the features into something unnatural, something that didn't look quite human. Tyler stumbled back, his heart racing. That's when the voice came. Soft, almost a whisper. "Tyler, open the door." His entire body went cold. The voice sounded familiar. Too familiar. It sounded like his mother. But that was impossible. She was hundreds of miles away. "Mom," he said instinctively, immediately regretting it the second the word left his mouth. The figure outside didn't respond right away. Instead, it tilted its head slowly, as if reacting to being recognized. Then it spoke again, louder this time, more urgent. "Tyler, it's me. Open the door." Every part of his mind screamed that something was wrong. His mother would never just show up unannounced in the middle of the night during a storm. And even if she did, she wouldn't just stand there silently for so long. Tyler backed away from the door, shaking his head. "No, you're not her," he whispered. The knocking started again, but this time it was louder, harder, more aggressive. "Open the door, Tyler." The voice had changed. It still sounded like his mother, but now there was something underneath it, something deeper, distorted, like multiple voices layered together. Tyler turned and ran into the kitchen, grabbing his phone and dialing 911 with trembling hands. As the phone rang, the knocking turned into pounding, violent and relentless, shaking the entire door as if whatever was outside was trying to break it down. "Please pick up," Tyler whispered desperately. But before the call could connect, the power went out completely, plunging the house into total darkness. The pounding stopped instantly. Silence filled the house so suddenly it felt suffocating. Tyler stood frozen, barely breathing, his phone screen the only source of light. Then, slowly from somewhere inside the house, he heard it. A creak. A floorboard. Not near the door. Not outside. But behind him. Tyler's blood ran cold as he turned slowly, his phone light shaking violently in his hand. The kitchen was empty, but the back door was open. He stared at it, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He knew for a fact he had locked every door earlier. Slowly, he backed away, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the doorway. That's when he heard it again. Not from outside this time. From inside the house. A whisper, right behind him. You should have opened the door. Tyler spun around, but there was nothing there. His breathing became erratic as panic took over. He ran toward the stairs, desperate to get to his room and lock himself inside. But halfway up, he heard footsteps below him, slow, deliberate footsteps following him. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He slammed his bedroom door shut, locking it, pushing a dresser against it as his hands shook uncontrollably. The footsteps stopped right outside his door. Silence. Then a soft knock. 3 slow taps. Tyler covered his mouth to keep from making a sound, tears streaming down his face. The voice came again, right on the other side of the door. Tyler, why are you hiding from me? It sounded exactly like his mother again. Perfectly normal. Perfectly calm. That was the worst part. Hours seemed to pass like that, with Tyler trapped inside his room, too afraid to move, too afraid to sleep, listening to occasional footsteps pacing outside, sometimes stopping at the door, sometimes moving away, but never leaving completely. Eventually, as the storm began to die down, the first light of morning started to creep through his window, and with it, the sound stopped. Completely. Tyler didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, waiting, listening, making sure it was truly over. When he finally gathered the courage to leave his room, the house was silent. Empty. The front door was still locked. The back door was closed. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The police found nothing when they arrived. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. No evidence anyone had been there at all. But as Tyler tried to explain what happened, one officer stopped him and asked a simple question that made his stomach drop. Are you sure your parents are out of state? Tyler nodded, confused. The officer hesitated before speaking again. We got a call earlier tonight, he said. A 911 call from this house. A woman's voice. She kept saying, he won't let me in. Tyler felt the world spin around him as the realization hit. Whatever had been outside had been trying to get inside. And whatever got in might not have been the same thing. Even now, Tyler refuses to stay alone in any house after midnight because sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, he still hears it. A soft knock, followed by a familiar voice calling his name from the other side of the door he knows he should never open again. Megan Parker had always believed that the fear of being home alone was something people eventually outgrew, a childish anxiety that faded with age. But the night she stayed alone in her family's house in Northern California proved to her that some fears don't come from imagination. They come from something very real, something that waits quietly until you're alone to finally reveal itself. It was supposed to be a normal night. Her parents had left for a weekend trip to visit relatives, and her younger brother was staying over at a friend's house, leaving Megan completely alone for the first time in years. At 21, she felt confident, even excited at the idea of having the entire house to herself, but that feeling didn't last long. From the moment the sun went down, the house felt different, too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. By 10 p.m., Megan was in her bedroom watching a movie, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping into her mind. The house made small noises, creaks, soft thuds, the usual sounds of an old building settling. But something about them felt deliberate, almost like they were happening in response to her movements. She paused the movie at one point, listening carefully, and that's when she heard it for the first time, a faint rustling sound coming from her closet. She frowned, staring at the closed closet door across the room. Probably just clothes shifting, she muttered to herself, trying to sound confident, but the truth was she hadn't opened that closet all day, and there was no reason anything inside should be moving. She shook it off, pressing play on a movie again, but her attention was gone now, completely focused on the closet. Minutes passed. Silence. It happened again. A soft movement, like something brushing against fabric. Megan slowly sat up, her heart beginning to race. "Hello," she called out, her voice uncertain. No response. The closet door remained closed, perfectly still. She let out a nervous laugh, grabbing her phone and turning on the flashlight. "Get it together," she whispered to herself as she stood up and walked toward the closet. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached the door, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, she considered just ignoring it, going back to bed, pretending nothing was there. But curiosity and fear pushed her forward. She yanked the door open quickly, shining the light inside. Nothing. Just clothes hanging normally, shoes on the floor, everything exactly as it should be. Megan exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. "See? Nothing," she said softly, closing the door again and turning back toward her bed. But as she took her first step away, she froze. Behind her from inside the closet came a slow, deliberate knock. Megan's entire body went rigid. She turned around slowly, staring at the closet door again. The knock came a second time, 3 soft taps evenly spaced. Her breathing became shallow as panic began to set in. That sound hadn't come from outside the closet. It had come from inside. Megan backed away, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible," she whispered, her voice trembling. She grabbed her phone and quickly texted her friend Ashley, trying to distract herself. But before she could finish typing, the closet door creaked open on its own, just a few inches. Megan dropped her phone. The room felt suddenly colder, the air heavy and suffocating. She stared at the door, unable to move, as it slowly opened wider. The darkness inside the closet looked wrong. Too deep, too thick, like it wasn't just a space, but something else entirely. Then she saw it, a shape, standing inside, completely still, watching her. Megan let out a choked scream and stumbled backward, falling onto the floor. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice breaking. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood there, partially hidden in the darkness. Then, slowly, it stepped forward. Megan's heart felt like it was going to explode as the figure emerged into the dim light of her room. And what she saw made her blood run cold. It looked like her. Same height, same hair, same face. But the expression was wrong. Completely emotionless. Its eyes locked onto hers with an unnatural intensity. Megan scrambled backward, shaking her head in disbelief. "This isn't real, this isn't real," she repeated over and over. The thing tilted its head slightly, mimicking her movements with a delay, like it was learning. Then it spoke. "Why did you open the door?" The voice was hers, perfectly identical. Megan screamed and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her and racing down the stairs. Her mind was spinning, struggling to process what she had just seen. It couldn't be real. It had to be a dream. But everything felt too vivid, too real. She grabbed the house phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands, but as she held the receiver to her ear, she heard something that made her freeze completely. Breathing, not from the phone, from behind her. Megan turned slowly, her entire body trembling. Standing at the bottom of the stairs was herself. The same face, the same expressionless stare. Holding her phone, Megan dropped the receiver, backing away slowly. "Stay away from me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The thing took a step closer, then another. "You weren't supposed to see me," it said calmly. Megan turned and ran toward the front door, throwing it open and stumbling outside into the cold night air. She didn't stop running until she reached the end of the street, collapsing on the pavement, gasping for breath. A passing car stopped, and the driver called the police. When they arrived, Megan tried to explain everything, her words coming out in broken, panicked fragments. The officers searched the house thoroughly. Every room, every closet, but they found nothing. No sign of forced entry. No evidence of anyone else being there. Just Megan's belongings exactly where they should be. Everything normal, except for one thing. When one of the officers checked Megan's bedroom closet, he noticed something strange. On the inside of the door, scratched deeply into the wood, were words repeated over and over again. "Don't open it. Megan refused to go back into the house after that night. She moved in with a friend, trying to convince herself it was all some kind of hallucination, a stress-induced breakdown. But weeks later, something happened that destroyed any hope of that explanation. Megan was sitting in her new apartment, scrolling through her phone late at night, when she received a notification. Her home security system had detected movement in her old house. Confused and uneasy, she opened the camera feed. The screen loaded slowly, revealing the dark interior of her old bedroom. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, from the corner of the room, the closet door creaked open. And out of the darkness, she stepped out, smiling this time. And just before the camera feed cut to black, the thing looked directly into the lens and whispered in Megan's voice, "I'm not in the closet anymore." From that night on, Megan never stayed alone again, because the most terrifying part wasn't what she saw that night. It was the realization that whatever had been in that closet hadn't just been hiding, it had been waiting for her to let out. Ryan Mitchell had always thought that the worst part of being home alone was the silence. But on that night, he realized silence wasn't the problem. The real horror began when that silence was broken by something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. It was just after 1:30 a.m. when Ryan woke up suddenly, his eyes snapping open to a pitch-black room. The power clearly out, the usual hum of electronics completely gone, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed in on his ears. At first, he didn't move, his mind still caught between sleep and awareness, but then he heard it, a voice. Faint, distant, coming from somewhere in the hallway outside his bedroom. Ryan, the sound was so soft it barely registered at first, like it had slipped in the room unnoticed, but once his brain processed it, his entire body tensed instantly. He sat up slowly, his heart beginning to pound, straining to listen. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe it was part of a dream. But then it came again, slightly louder this time. "Ryan, are you awake?" His throat went dry. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. It sounded exactly like his older sister, Emily. But that made no sense. Emily had moved out months ago and was living in another state. There was absolutely no way she could be in the house. Ryan swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. "Emily," he called out cautiously, his voice barely above a whisper. No response, just silence again. A deep, unnatural silence that made the house feel empty in a way that was somehow worse than before. Ryan reached for his phone on the nightstand, turning on the flashlight, the beam cutting weakly through the darkness as he stood up from his bed. Every instinct told him not to open the door, not to step into that hallway, but the need to understand what was happening pushed him forward. He walked slowly toward the door, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. For a moment, he hesitated, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. Then, before he could stop himself, he opened it. The hallway was empty, completely empty. The beam of his flashlight stretched down the long corridor, illuminating family photos on the walls, all of them perfectly still, perfectly normal. Too normal. Ryan stepped out carefully, his bare feet silent against the wooden floor. "Emily," he called again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. He moved down the hallway, checking each room one by one. The bathroom, his parents' bedroom, the guest room. All empty, all untouched. The house felt abandoned. But then, just as he was about to turn back toward his room, he heard it again, this time from behind him. "Why did you come out?" Ryan spun around instantly, his light shaking as it scanned the hallway. Nothing. No one. But the voice had been closer this time. Much closer. Almost right behind him. Panic began to creep into his chest as he backed away slowly, his eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. "This isn't funny," he said, trying to sound firm, but his voice betrayed him, cracking slightly. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then from somewhere downstairs came a loud crash. Ryan flinched, his heart jumping into his throat. That was real. That wasn't his imagination. Someone, or something, was inside the house. He stood frozen for a moment, debating what to do, but before he could make a decision, the voice came again, this time from downstairs. "Ryan, come here." His blood ran cold. It was still Emily's voice. Exactly the same. But now there was something else mixed into it. Something deeper, something wrong, like another voice overlapping hers, slightly out of sync. Ryan shook his head, backing toward his bedroom. "No, I'm not going down there," he whispered to himself. But the voice didn't stop. "You have to come down," it said, more insistently now. "I can't come up." That sentence sent a chill through his entire body. Why couldn't it come up? What was stopping it? Ryan's mind raced as fear tightened its grip on him. He quickly retreated into his bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it, pushing a chair against the handle. His hands were shaking uncontrollably now as he tried to call 911, but his phone showed no signal. No service. Just a blank screen. No, no, no. Emater panicraising rapidly. Then he heard it, the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Slow, heavy footsteps. Coming up. Ryan's entire body went rigid. "I thought you said you couldn't come up," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The footsteps stopped halfway up the stairs. Silence. Then, after a few seconds, they slowly retreated back down. Ryan exhaled shakily, relief washing over him for just a moment, until he heard something else. Another set of footsteps, this time already upstairs, right outside his door. His heart nearly stopped. There were two, one downstairs, one upstairs. A soft knock echoed against his bedroom door. 3 slow taps. Ryan covered his mouth, trying to keep from making a sound as tears filled his eyes. The voice came again, right on the other side of the door. "Ryan, open the door. I am scared." It sounded exactly like Emily again, perfect, convincing, desperate. But now Ryan understood. That wasn't Emily. It never had been. And whatever was downstairs wasn't alone. He didn't respond. He didn't move. He just sat there, frozen, listening as the thing outside his door began to pace back and forth slowly. Minutes felt like hours. The tension was unbearable. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet again. Completely silent. Ryan waited and waited. Eventually, as the first faint light of dawn began to creep through his window, he heard something that made his stomach drop completely. A third voice. From downstairs. "Are you still there?" It wasn't Emily's voice. It wasn't the same distorted one either. It was different, deeper, and it sounded curious. Ryan didn't move for the rest of the night. When morning finally came and the power returned, he gathered the courage to leave his room. The house was empty, completely empty. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. Nothing out of place. Just silence. But as he stood in the hallway, trying to convince himself it was over, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the wall, just outside his bedroom door, there were 3 sets of handprints. Not fingerprints. Full handprints. Pressed into the wall like something had been leaning there for a long time. And they were at different heights. One normal, one slightly taller, and one much lower, almost crawling level. Ryan moved out of that house the same day, refusing to ever go back. But the worst part wasn't what he saw. It was what he realized later. That the voice downstairs had said it couldn't come up because it didn't need to. There was already something waiting upstairs. And even now, sometimes when Ryan wakes up in the middle of the night, he hears it again, a soft voice in the hallway, calling his name, followed by another voice, and another. Each one slightly different, each one getting closer, reminding him that whatever was in that house that night was never just one thing.